Sometimes the universe doesn't hide its secrets. It buries them and waits to see who's foolish enough to dig them back up. The wind howled through the ruins like a living thing, carrying the dry metallic taste of scorched alloy across Ethan Cole's tongue as he picked his way through what used to be a research outpost. His boots crunching over fractured glass and ash that shimmered faintly under the pale light of a dying sky. His scanner flickering in and out with every step, interference thick enough to make most scavengers turn back hours ago. But Ethan had learned a long time ago that broken places were where the valuable things ended up, or the dangerous ones. And sometimes there wasn't much difference. A low static pulse ticked against his wrist unit, irregular, almost like a heartbeat buried under layers of debris. He paused, breath fogging faintly in the cold air, head tilting as the signal stuttered again. Not mechanical, not clean, something organic, something alive. That's new, he muttered under his breath, shifting his pack and stepping carefully toward a collapsed section of reinforced plating where the signal spiked sharply. The metal groaned softly under his weight, unstable, but he pressed forward anyway, kneeling and brushing away dust and fragments until his gloved hand froze mid-motion. Beneath the wreckage was skin, not human, not anything he'd seen up close before. A faint blue glow pulsing weakly beneath a layer of fine ash. Like light struggling through deep water, he swallowed, pulse quickening as he cleared more of the debris, revealing the shape of a girl, her form partially encased in a fractured containment shell, delicate lines of alien design running across its surface, cracked but still humming faintly as if trying to hold something in or keep something out. Her face was still, eyes closed, features calm in a way that didn't belong in a place like this. But it was the way the scanner reacted that made his chest tighten, every reading spiking. Warning icons flashing across his display in rapid succession. Containment breach risk, the system whispered, voice calm and detached. Unknown biological classification. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Ethan let out a slow breath, staring down at her. Then at the flickering warnings, his jaw tightening slightly as the signal pulsed again, softer this time. Weaker, like something fading, his instincts screamed at him to walk away. To mark the coordinates and sell the data to someone better equipped. Someone who didn't work alone in a patched-up salvage ship barely holding together. But his hands didn't move away. Instead, they hovered there, hesitating only for a moment before he started pulling at the debris again. Carefully, deliberately, ignoring the way the metal creaked and shifted under pressure, ignoring the warnings climbing higher in urgency. You picked a hell of a place to take a nap, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. As the last piece of plating gave way with a soft scrape, the containment shell flickered violently, then dimmed, the glow under her skin faltering for a split second before stabilizing again. Weaker now, her chest rose just barely, a fragile rhythm that made something in Ethan's chest twist unexpectedly. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair as the wind swept through the ruins again, colder now, sharper, as if the entire place was watching, waiting. Yeah, he murmured, already reaching for his med kit despite every alarm still flashing across his visor. I'm definitely gonna regret this. You are not supposed to touch things you do not understand. The voice came out as a whisper, thin and unsteady, but clear enough to make Ethan freeze mid-motion. His fingers still wrapped around the fractured edge of the containment shell as he looked down at her. Her eyes now open, not fully, just enough to reveal a faint glow beneath heavy lids, like light struggling through deep water, watching him with something that was not quite fear and not quite anger. Yeah, he exhaled slowly, pulling his hand back a few inches but not leaving. I get that a lot. The wind pushed through the broken structure again, carrying a sharper chill this time, biting through the seams of his jacket as the scanner on his wrist flared with fresh warnings, proximity alerts stacking one over another, as if the world itself had noticed what he had uncovered. She shifted slightly beneath the debris, a small movement that sent a faint ripple of light across her skin, and he realized then that the shell around her had not just been protection, it had been restraint. The lines etched into it were not decorative, they pulsed in patterns, dim now, failing. You need to leave, she said, her voice stronger this time, though. It still trembled at the edges. Whatever you think you have found, it is not worth what follows. Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose, glancing up at the skyline where jagged remains of towers cut into the pale sky, then back down at her. "That is usually when it is," he replied, already reaching for the compact cutter at his belt. The tool hummed softly as it powered on, a thin line of heat shimmering at its edge. "Do not." Her hand moved, slow but deliberate, fingers brushing against his wrist. The contact was colder than the air, but there was something else there, something steady beneath the weakness, something controlled. "If you break it, you will not be able to put it back." Ethan paused, eyes flicking to her hand, then to her face, searching for something in that expression that might make him stop, something that said she was wrong, or lying, or dangerous in a way he could measure, but all he saw was certainty, and underneath it, something that looked a lot like resignation. "I am not planning to," he said quietly, adjusting the cutter instead, angling it away from the central lines. Working at the already fractured sections, the metal resisted at first, then gave with a soft hiss, a small release of pressure that made the shell flicker again, brighter this time. Her breath caught, not in pain, but in something sharper, like a shift in balance. The glow under her skin pulsed in response, stronger for a brief moment before settling again. "You do not understand," she said, her voice lowering, almost steady now. "I chose to be here." That made him stop, just for a second, the cutter hovering in place as he frowned slightly. "Yeah," he murmured, glancing around at the collapsed structure, the fractured plating, the silence that felt too heavy for an abandoned place. "That does not exactly sell it." Another section of the shell gave way. The faint hum that had been constant since he found her stuttered, then dropped, the patterns along its surface dimming into nothing. Her eyes opened a little wider, the glow in them sharpening, and for a moment the air itself seemed to hold still, the wind outside cutting off abruptly, as if something had drawn a breath and forgotten to release it. Ethan felt it then, not through the scanner, not through any reading or alert, but in the way the silence pressed in the way his instincts shifted from caution to something deeper, something older. "There," he said softly, easing the last piece of the shell away. "You are free." She stared at him for a long second, something unreadable moving behind those glowing eyes. Then she exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of something like sadness touching her expression. "That," she said, almost gently, "is what I was afraid of." When something stops hiding, it is not because it feels safe. The thought slipped through Ethan's mind as the silence settled too perfectly around them. The wind outside gone as if the world itself had paused to listen, his scanner flickering wildly before cutting to black entirely. A dead screen reflecting his own face back at him for a split second before he tapped it once, then twice. "That is not good," he muttered under his breath, shifting his weight as he looked back down at her. She was different now. Not stronger in the way he expected, but present in a way she had not been before. The faint glow beneath her blue skin no longer flickering randomly, but moving with intention, slow pulses that matched the rhythm of her breathing. Her eyes fully open now, watching him with a calm that felt out of place in the ruins. "You feel it," she said softly, not a question. Ethan glanced up again, scanning the skyline out of habit, even though his equipment had already failed him. "Yeah," he replied, voice low. "I feel something." He shifted his shoulders slightly, rolling out the tension building there. "Usually that means it is time to leave." For a moment she said nothing, her gaze drifting past him toward the open horizon, and he followed it instinctively. The sky above the broken city had changed, not visibly at first, but in the way the light bent slightly at the edges, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer road. Subtle, easy to miss if you were not looking for it, but impossible to ignore once you saw it. "They are already looking," she said, her voice steady now, no trace of the earlier weakness left in it. Ethan let out a quiet breath, nodding once as if that confirmed something he had already assumed. "Then we should probably not be here when they arrive." He reached down, sliding an arm carefully behind her shoulders, pausing only when she did not resist. Her body was lighter than he expected, but there was a density to it, a grounded weight that felt different from anything human, like lifting something that carried its own gravity. She studied him as he moved, not questioning, just observing. "You should leave me," she said again, quieter this time, not as a warning, but as something closer to an offer. Ethan adjusted his grip slightly, lifting her free from the last of the debris. Ignoring the faint ache in his arms as he straightened. "That option expired about 5 minutes ago," he replied, glancing down at her briefly. "You can complain about it later." Her lips parted slightly as if to respond, then closed again, something unreadable passing across her expression before she looked away, toward the horizon again. The distortion in the sky deepening, lines of light bending in unnatural ways, as if space itself was being pulled tight. Ethan did not need his scanner to tell him that whatever was coming was not subtle. He shifted his stance and started moving, boots crunching over the broken ground as he made his way back toward where he had left his transport. The path was not long, maybe 100 yards through the debris field, but it felt longer now, every step measured, every sound amplified in the unnatural quiet. "What are they going to do when they find me?" he asked after a few seconds, not looking at her, focusing instead on the terrain ahead. Her answer came without hesitation. "They will not look for you," she said. "They will look for what you released." Ethan let out a small breath that might have been a laugh if there had been any humor in it. "That is comforting." He adjusted his grip again as she shifted slightly, her hand resting lightly against his chest for balance. The contact brief but grounding in a way he did not expect. "And if they find it," he added, glancing down at her for a fraction of a second. Her eyes met his, steady, unwavering. "Then nothing else will matter," she said. And for the first time since he found her, Ethan did not have a response to that. He just kept walking, faster now, as the sky above them began to ripple like water under pressure. "The sky should not move like that," Ethan said under his breath as he broke into a faster stride, boots sliding slightly over loose debris while the light above them twisted in slow, unnatural waves, like something massive pressing against the fabric of the world from the other side. His ship came into view at the edge of the ruined field, a compact salvage hauler with scorched plating and patched seams that caught the dim light in uneven reflections. It looked small now, smaller than it ever had before, like it did not belong in the same reality as whatever was unfolding overhead. "How long do we have?" he asked, shifting his grip as her weight settled more fully against him. She did not answer immediately, her gaze fixed upward, tracking something he could not see, the glow beneath her skin pulsing in a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the strange distortion above. "They are not bound by your sense of time," she said finally, her voice calm but distant, as if part of her attention was somewhere else entirely. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "That is not exactly helpful," he muttered, pushing the last stretch toward the ship. The access ramp was still down, half buried in dust but functional. He stepped onto it and felt the familiar vibration of the vessel under his boots, solid, real, something he understood. He carried her inside and set her carefully onto the nearest seat. The interior lights flickered once before stabilizing, casting a warm but dim glow over the cramped space filled with tools, spare parts, and the quiet hum of systems that had been repaired too many times to count. He moved quickly, sealing the hatch and crossing to the control panel, his hands moving on instinct as he powered up the engines. The console responded sluggishly at first, then snapped to life in a cascade of data, most of it red, interference warnings stacking across the display. "Come on," he murmured, adjusting the frequency bands, forcing the systems to recalibrate. Behind him he could feel her presence more clearly now, not just physically, but like a pressure in the air, subtle but undeniable. He glanced back briefly. She was sitting upright now, unsupported, her posture steady despite everything. Her eyes no longer dim but sharp, focused. "Your vessel will not outrun them," she said, not as criticism, just as fact. Ethan leaned back slightly in his seat, fingers still moving across the controls. "Good thing I am not planning to outrun them," he replied, pulling up a manual override and rerouting power from non-essential systems. The engine core hummed louder, a low, steady vibration that filled the cabin. "Then what are you planning?" she asked, watching him with that same calm intensity. He paused for half a second, then glanced at her again, a faint smirk touching the corner of his mouth despite the tension in his shoulders. "I am planning not to be where they expect," he said. The ship shuddered slightly as the engines reached operational threshold. Outside, the distortion in the sky deepened, the light bending inward now, focusing, converging on a single point somewhere above the ruins they had just left. The air around the ship seemed to tighten, the hull creaking softly as if reacting to a pressure that had not yet fully arrived. Ethan's gaze flicked between the instruments and the forward viewport, calculating distances, angles, possibilities, most of them not great. "You do not understand," she said again, softer this time, not as a warning, but as something closer to concern. "They are not searching randomly. They know exactly where I am." Ethan's fingers slowed for just a moment, that detail settling in. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to her. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I figured as much." He reached up and flipped the final switch. The engines surged, the ship lifting slightly as it prepared to break free of the ground. "That just means we do not give them a straight line to follow," he added, the ramp sealing with a heavy thud as the vessel rose, dust swirling beneath it in a widening circle. Above them the sky tightened further, the ripple collapsing inward as something unseen began to emerge, and for the first time since he found her, Ethan felt the edge of something he could not measure, not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that told him this was bigger than salvage, bigger than survival, and somehow, without fully understanding why, he still chose to stay. There is a moment before everything changes when the world feels too quiet, Ethan thought as the ship lifted free from the ruins, the engines humming beneath his feet while the ground dropped away in a slow, steady descent, dust spiraling outward in soft rings that looked almost peaceful compared to what was happening above. The sky was no longer just bending. It was folding, light collapsing inward toward a single point that pulsed with a dull, distant glow, like a star trying to force its way into existence where it did not belong. His hands tightened slightly on the controls as he angled the ship low instead of climbing, skimming just above the broken structures, keeping the wreckage between them and whatever was forming overhead. "You are moving toward density," she said from behind him, her voice quieter now, but no less steady. Ethan did not look back this time, eyes locked on the shifting terrain ahead. "Yeah," he replied, adjusting the thrusters to keep the ride smooth despite the uneven airflow. Less open sky, more interference, harder to track clean. There was a pause, not silence, but something measured, like she was evaluating his reasoning rather than dismissing it. "You think like prey," she said finally, and there was no insult in it, only observation. Ethan let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I think like someone who does not want to get caught," he answered. The ship dipped slightly as he guided it through a narrow gap between two fractured towers, the metal hull groaning softly as it adjusted to the pressure shifts. Behind him, he could feel it again. That subtle presence, stronger now, like standing near a source of heat you could not see. He risked a glance over his shoulder. She was no longer slumped or fragile, her posture straight, one hand resting lightly against the side of the seat as she watched the world outside with focused attention. The glow beneath her skin more defined now, tracing faint patterns that shifted too slowly to follow. "They will not lose you in this," she said, her gaze returning to him. "They are not searching for a signal. They are following a certainty." Ethan frowned slightly, eyes flicking back to the controls as he processed that. "Meaning?" he prompted. She tilted her head just a fraction, as if considering how much to say. "Meaning there is no place you can go where they will not know," she replied. And there it was again. Not fear, not urgency, just fact, the kind that did not change based on perspective. Ethan sat with that for a second, the weight of it settling in. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to her. "All right," he said quietly, adjusting the trajectory slightly, not away from the disturbance above, but along its edge. Then we stopped trying to disappear. The ship surged forward, engines responding with a deeper hum as he pushed them harder, the structures around them blurring slightly as speed increased. "What are you doing?" she asked, and this time there was something new in her voice, not concern, but curiosity. Ethan's eyes stayed forward, tracking the shifting light above, the way it pulsed in intervals, not random, not chaotic, but patterned, like something reaching, something aligning. "I am watching them," he said, his tone calm despite the tension coiled beneath it. "Everything that hunts has a rhythm, a pattern, something it relies on." He adjusted the angle again, bringing the ship closer to the outer edge of the distortion, close enough that the instruments began to flicker violently again. warnings stacking faster than he could read them. "You think you can learn them before they reach you," she said. And this time it was not a question. Ethan allowed himself a faint, almost tired smile. "I think it is better than waiting to be found," he replied. Above them the light intensified, the folded sky beginning to separate at the center, not tearing, but opening, like something vast was preparing to step through a door that had never been meant to exist. And in that moment, with the hum of the engines beneath him and the quiet presence behind him, Ethan realized something that settled deeper than fear, deeper than instinct. Whatever she had been hiding from, whatever had been buried in those ruins, it was not just following her, it was responding to her, and he had just placed himself directly in its path. "You do not study a storm by standing beneath it," she said, her voice steady but quieter now, as if the weight of what approached was pressing down on more than just the air. Ethan did not answer right away, his eyes fixed on the shifting distortion ahead, the way the light folded and unfolded in slow, deliberate pulses, each one slightly different from the last, like something adjusting its position in response to them. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision, rerouting power again, dampening non-essential systems, anything that could give them a clearer read even through the interference. "And you do not outrun one by pretending it is not there," he replied finally, angling the ship just a few degrees closer to the edge of the anomaly. The hull responded with a low, strained hum, not damaged, but aware, like a living thing sensing pressure building beyond its limits. The instruments flickered wildly, lines of data breaking apart and reforming too quickly to follow. But in the chaos there was something consistent, a pattern buried beneath the noise. He narrowed his eyes slightly, focusing not on the spikes, but on the gaps between them. "There," he murmured, almost to himself. Behind him she shifted, leaning forward just enough to follow his gaze toward the forward display. "You see it," she said, not surprised, just confirming. Ethan gave a small nod. "It is not random," he said, adjusting their vector again, matching the rhythm he was beginning to trace. The ship responded, sliding along the edge of the distortion in a smoother arc now, as if it were finding a current instead of fighting it. The light above reacted subtly, the pulse tightening for a fraction of a second before expanding again. "It is aligning," she added, her voice lower now, carrying something that felt like recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Everything aligns to something," he said. "You just have to figure out what." The ship shuddered once, a brief tremor that passed through the frame and into his hands. He steadied the controls instinctively, eyes flicking to the structural readouts. Still holding, barely, he adjusted again, this time not following the pattern exactly, but offsetting it, testing the response. The light above shifted again, slower this time, almost hesitant, and for a moment the pressure in the air lessened, just enough to notice. "You are not hiding," she said, her tone different. Now, something closer to understanding threading through it. "You are interfering." Ethan allowed himself a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "If they know where you are, then maybe we can make them unsure about how to get there." There was a pause, longer this time, and when she spoke again, it was softer, more thoughtful. "That is not how most species respond to being hunted." Ethan shrugged slightly, even as his attention remained locked on the shifting field ahead. "Most species do not get a say in it," he replied. The ship surged forward again as he pushed the engines a little harder, riding the edge of the distortion like a wave. The light above them dimmed for a fraction of a second, then brightened sharply, the center point beginning to take shape now, not a solid form, but a suggestion of one, something vast pressing closer to the boundary. "They are adapting," she said, and this time there was no distance in her voice, only focus. Ethan nodded once. "Good," he said, tightening his grip on the controls. "That means they are paying attention." The hull creaked softly again, the air around them growing heavier, thicker, like the space itself was resisting their movement. But he did not slow. He adjusted again, shifting their path in a way that broke the pattern he had just established. The response was immediate. The light above faltered, just for a heartbeat, the pressure easing again before building once more. And in that brief moment, Ethan felt it clearly, not through instruments, not through instinct alone, but through something deeper, a connection between action and reaction, cause and effect. You said they follow certainty, he said, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. Then maybe the only way to survive is to take that away from them. Behind him she was silent, watching, not questioning, not warning, just observing, and for the first time since he pulled her from the ruins, there was something else in that silence, something that was not fear, not caution, but the faintest hint of trust, fragile and uncertain, as the sky above them continued to open. Certainty is a language, she said quietly, her voice threading through the low hum of the ship like something fragile but precise. And they have spoken it for longer than your species has understood stars. Ethan did not look back this time, his eyes fixed forward as the distortion above them deepened into something more defined, not just light bending, but structure forming within it, vast and distant yet impossibly close, like seeing the outline of something enormous through water. His fingers moved faster now, not frantic, but deliberate, adjusting vectors in small increments, each shift testing the response, each response feeding the next decision. Then maybe it is time someone interrupts the conversation, he replied. The ship angled sharply to the right, cutting across the rhythm he had been following for the past several seconds. The effect was immediate. The pulse above them staggered, the alignment slipping just enough to create a gap. A momentary hesitation in whatever process was unfolding. The pressure inside the cabin eased slightly, just enough for him to feel the difference in his chest, like taking a deeper breath without realizing he had been holding it. You are creating noise, she observed, her tone no longer distant, but engaged. Ethan allowed himself a faint nod. Yeah, he said, and noise makes it harder to lock onto anything clean. The ship dipped again, this time lower, skimming close to the surface of the broken terrain, the jagged outlines of collapsed structures rushing past beneath them in a blur of shadow and dust. Above, the forming shape reacted again, slower now, adjusting, recalculating, the light folding inward and outward in a new sequence that did not quite match the previous one. They are learning, she said, and there was something new in her voice now, not fear, but recognition of an equal force. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Good, he murmured, because so am I. He pushed the engines a little harder, feeling the vibration increase through the frame. The ship was not built for this kind of sustained maneuvering, not at the edge of something that was actively reshaping the space around it, but it held, barely. He shifted their path again, not in response to the pattern this time, but ahead of it, predicting where it would move based on what he had already seen. The distortion above flickered, just for a fraction of a second, and in that instant the central formation lost cohesion, its outline blurring before snapping back into place. You disrupted it, she said, softer now, almost surprised. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. Not enough, he replied, but enough to matter. Behind him there was a subtle shift, the faint sound of movement as she adjusted her position, and for the first time since he had pulled her from the ruins, he felt something else in the air, not pressure, not energy, but presence, not overwhelming, not threatening, just there, steady and aware. He glanced back briefly, her gaze met his, and for a moment the glow in her eyes softened, not dimmed, but focused, like she was no longer looking at him as an unknown variable, but as something understood. Why are you doing this? She asked, and this time it was not a warning, not a test, just a question. Ethan looked at her for a second longer than he should have, then turned back to the controls, the answer coming out quieter than he expected. Because you asked me to leave, he said. The ship surged forward again, cutting across another forming line in the distortion. The response above was sharper this time, the light collapsing inward more aggressively before expanding again, the shape within it becoming clearer, closer, something vast pressing against the boundary with growing insistence. The air inside the cabin grew heavier again, the systems flickering under the strain, but Ethan did not slow. He adjusted again, breaking the pattern, creating another ripple in the alignment, each one small, each one temporary, but together forming something larger, something unpredictable. And for the first time since the sky began to open, the certainty above them faltered, just enough to feel it. You are not just confusing them anymore, she said, her voice quieter but carrying a new weight. You are forcing them to change. Ethan did not respond immediately, His focus locked on the forward view as the distortion above continued to evolve. The once slow pulses now tightening into sharper intervals, more precise, more reactive. The shape within the light no longer distant or abstract, but forming edges, contours that hinted at something vast and structured, something that was no longer simply arriving but actively engaging. He adjusted the ship again, pushing it into another sharp arc that cut across the emerging pattern. The engines protested with a deeper vibration, a low strain that ran through the frame and into his bones. "Good," he said finally, his voice steady despite the growing pressure. "That means they are no longer certain." The ship skimmed past a jagged ridge of collapsed metal, close enough that the hull registered the proximity with a soft warning tone. But he did not pull away. He held the line, riding the edge between control and risk. Behind him she stood now, no longer seated, her balance steady despite the motion, one hand resting lightly against the bulkhead as she watched the distortion. With an intensity that matched his own, the glow beneath her skin brighter now, the patterns within it clearer, almost synchronized with the shifting light above. "They are adapting faster," she said, not alarmed, but aware. Ethan nodded slightly. "Then we adapt faster," he replied, though there was a subtle edge in his tone now, not doubt, but recognition of the limits he was approaching. The ship was not designed for this. His body was not designed for this. But he continued anyway, because stopping was not an option he recognized anymore. The sky above shifted again, the central formation tightening into something more defined, a convergence point where the light no longer scattered but focused, and from that point a faint line extended downward, not visible in the usual sense, but felt like a thread of pressure reaching toward them, searching. "They are narrowing," she said, her voice lower now. Ethan felt it too, the space around them compressing slightly, not enough to hinder movement, but enough to signal intent. He adjusted the ship again, but this time the response was different. The distortion corrected faster, the gap he created closing almost instantly. "They are learning your pattern," she added, and there was no accusation in it, just fact. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands steady on the controls even as his mind recalculated. "Then it is time to stop giving them one," he said. And for the first time since he started this, he broke completely from the rhythm he had been building. Instead of flowing along the edge, he cut directly toward the center. The ship surging forward into the heart of the distortion. The instruments flared violently, warnings stacking faster than they could be processed. The hull groaned under the sudden pressure change, but he held the course. "What are you doing?" she asked, and this time there was something sharper in her voice. Not fear, but urgency. Ethan's gaze did not waver, locked on the shifting core ahead. "If they expect us to run," he said quietly, "then we stop running." The light around them intensified, the forming shape reacting instantly, the convergence point tightening as if pulling them in, the pressure rising sharply. But within that intensity, something else appeared, a delay, a fraction of a second where the alignment struggled to adjust, and Ethan saw it, the hesitation, the break in certainty. "There," he whispered, adjusting the trajectory just slightly, exploiting that moment, stretching it, turning it into something more than a fraction. Behind him she was silent now, not questioning, not warning, just watching. And in that silence, there was no longer distance between them, only shared focus, shared awareness. As the ship moved deeper into the unknown, and the sky above them responded in ways it had not before. "This is the part where most people turn away," Ethan said under his breath as the ship crossed fully into the heart of the distortion, the light around them no longer distant or abstract, but pressing in from every direction, bending across the cockpit glass in slow, fluid arcs that made depth and distance feel uncertain. The instruments had gone beyond flickering now, most of the displays frozen or looping incomplete data, leaving him with only manual control and instinct. The hum of the engines deepened into something heavier, a constant vibration that felt less like motion and more like resistance, as if the space itself was pushing back against their presence. He adjusted the controls in small, precise movements, no longer chasing patterns but disrupting them at the source, each shift sending ripples through the light around them. The central formation reacting faster now, tightening, correcting, learning. "You are inside their focus," she said, her voice steady but closer. Now, just behind his shoulder, Ethan could feel her there without looking, the faint warmth of her presence contrasting against the cold pressure pressing in from all sides. Yeah, he replied quietly. That is the point. The ship lurched slightly as a new wave of distortion rolled through, not forceful, but disorienting, like stepping onto ground that did not quite hold still. He steadied the controls again, breathing slow, and even despite the tension building in his chest, they are trying to define you, she continued, her tone more focused now, as if she was seeing something he could not, to reduce you to something predictable. Ethan allowed himself a faint, almost tired smile. Then they picked the wrong person, he said, shifting the ship again, this time not along any visible line, but into the empty space between them, a place where the light had not yet formed a pattern. The effect was immediate. The central structure above faltered, just for a second, its alignment slipping as it tried to account for a movement it had not anticipated. The pressure in the cabin fluctuated, easing and tightening in uneven intervals, like a system recalibrating under strain. You are breaking their certainty, she said, and there was something new in her voice now, not just recognition, but something closer to awe. Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the shifting light. Not breaking, he corrected quietly, bending. The ship surged forward again, deeper into the core, where the light was brightest, the patterns most complex, and the reactions most immediate. The shape within the distortion was clearer now, not fully visible, but defined enough to suggest scale, something vast and layered, existing just beyond the boundary, pressing closer with every adjustment he made. Why did you choose this? He asked suddenly, his voice softer now, not taking his eyes off the path ahead. There was a pause behind him, a moment where the hum of the ship and the shifting light filled the space between them. Because this was the only place they would not follow, she said finally, and there was something in that answer that settled deeper than the words themselves. Ethan nodded once, the realization forming even as he continued to move. Until now, he added. She did not deny it. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of understanding, of consequences that had already begun to unfold. The light around them pulsed again, stronger this time, the central formation tightening, as if preparing for something final, something decisive. And for the first time since entering the distortion, Ethan felt it clearly, not just pressure or resistance, but intention, focused and deliberate, directed at them. He tightened his grip on the controls, not pulling away, not slowing down, but leaning into it, because turning back was no longer an option he could see. And somewhere behind him, in the quiet space between breaths and shifting light, she stopped telling him to leave. There is always a moment when something watching decides to stop observing and start responding. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The shift in the air was no longer subtle, no longer a background pressure, but something focused, deliberate. The light around the ship tightening in slow, controlled layers, not chaotic anymore, but structured, purposeful, like a system locking into place. His hands remained steady on the controls even as every instinct told him that whatever threshold they had crossed, they were no longer just interfering with it. They were inside its attention. They have chosen, she said softly behind him, and there was no distance in her voice now, no hesitation, just clarity. Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the warped space ahead where the central formation had begun to stabilize, its edges no longer shifting unpredictably, but holding shape, defining itself in response to them. Yeah, he replied quietly. Feels like it. The ship vibrated. Under him, not from strain this time, but from resonance, as if the very structure of the vessel was being read, measured, interpreted. The remaining instruments flickered once, then went completely dark, leaving only the dim interior lights and the distorted glow beyond the cockpit glass. You cannot outmaneuver this, she continued, stepping closer now, her presence at his side rather than behind him. Ethan could see her reflection faintly in the glass, the soft blue glow of her skin, contrasting against the warped light outside. I am not trying to, he said, his voice lower now, more focused. I am trying to understand it before it understands me. The light surged again, not outward this time but inward, collapsing toward a single axis that aligned directly with their position. The pressure in the cabin increased, subtle but unmistakable, like gravity shifting just enough to be felt in his chest. His breathing slowed instinctively, controlled, measured. It is already beyond that, she said. And for the first time there was something else beneath her words, not fear, but something heavier, something like acceptance. Ethan shook his head slightly, not in denial but in refusal. Nothing is beyond anything, he murmured, adjusting the controls again. Even though there was little left to adjust, the ship responded sluggishly now, as if movement itself required permission from whatever held the space around them. Then why do you continue? She asked. In this time the question carried weight, not challenge, but genuine need to understand. Ethan was quiet for a moment, the hum of the ship and the low pulse of the light filling the space between them. Then he spoke, not looking at her. Because you asked me to leave, he said, and I could not do it. There was silence after that, but not empty silence. Something settled there, something that neither of them tried to break. Outside the light shifted again, the central structure focusing more tightly, and within it something new appeared, not form, not shape, but direction, a single line of intention extending toward them, precise and unwavering. It has found you, she said, and this time the words were not distant or observational. They were immediate, grounded in the moment. Ethan nodded once, his grip tightening slightly on the controls. Yeah, he said quietly. Now it just needs to decide what I am. The pressure increased again, the space around them compressing in a way that made movement feel heavier, slower. But he did not pull back, did not attempt to escape. Instead, he held the position, letting the ship remain exactly where it was, within the center of that focus, within the line of that intention, because somewhere in the pattern, somewhere in the way it reacted, there was still something he had not seen, something he could still learn. And as the light converged fully around them, he realized this was no longer about survival. It was about what happened when something beyond understanding met something that refused to yield. If it cannot understand you, it will try to simplify you, she said, her voice quieter now, but carrying a weight that felt older than the ruins below them, older than the stars themselves. Ethan did not move, not even a fraction, his hands resting lightly on the controls as the ship held position within the tightening field of light. The distortion no longer chaotic, no longer reactive in scattered pulses, but focused, deliberate, every shift now part of a single, unified response. The space around them felt denser, like breathing through water, each inhale slower, more deliberate, his heartbeat steady but louder in his ears. Then it is going to have a hard time, he said softly, not as defiance, not as bravado, just fact. The glow outside intensified again, the central axis aligning perfectly with the ship, and for a moment everything else faded, the broken world below, the ruined skyline. Even the hum of the engines seemed distant, replaced by a single, overwhelming presence that was not seen but felt, like standing in front of something vast enough to eclipse thought itself. Do not resist it, she said, stepping closer until she stood beside him fully, her shoulder nearly brushing his. Resistance gives it shape, gives it something to define. Ethan's gaze remained forward, fixed on the point where all the light converged. Then what? He asked quietly. I just sit here and let it decide. There was a pause, not hesitation, but consideration, as if the answer mattered more now than it ever had before. No, she said finally, her voice softer than before but clearer. You remain undefined. Ethan exhaled slowly, the words settling into him not as instruction, but as something instinctive, something he had already been doing without realizing it. His grip on the controls loosened slightly, not letting go, but no longer forcing direction, allowing the ship to drift within the field rather than pushing against it. The effect was immediate. The pressure around them shifted, not increasing, not decreasing, but changing, as if the system recalibrated in response to the absence of resistance. The light flickered once, a subtle break in its perfect alignment. You see, she said, her tone almost quiet with recognition. Ethan nodded slightly, eyes narrowing as he watched the shift. It is looking for a pattern, he murmured, something to lock onto. He adjusted the ship again, but this time not with intent to disrupt, only to vary, small movements, inconsistent, irregular, never repeating. The light responded each time, trying to follow, trying to predict, but always just a fraction too late, always just off. "You are becoming noise again," she said, and there was something like awe in her voice now. Ethan allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Not noise," he corrected quietly. "Too many possibilities." The central axis wavered again, the focused line of intention shifting slightly as it struggled to reconcile the lack of consistency. The pressure eased just enough to feel like space again, like something that could be moved through rather than endured. "They cannot define what refuses to be defined," she said. And for the first time, there was something else beneath her words. Not warning, not distance, but something closer to hope. Ethan leaned forward slightly, eyes tracking the changes with renewed clarity. "Then we stay that way," he replied, the ship drifting just enough to keep the system uncertain, each movement subtle, each variation deliberate but unpredictable. The light around them pulsed again, weaker this time, not gone, not defeated, but uncertain, and in that uncertainty, something shifted, not in the sky, not in the space around them, but in the balance between hunter and hunted. As if for the first time, the thing beyond the boundary was no longer entirely sure what it was looking at, and Ethan, for all his limitations, for all the fragility of the ship beneath him, had become something it could not easily understand. "Uncertainty is not something they were built to tolerate," she said softly, her voice almost lost beneath the low, shifting hum that filled the ship. But Ethan heard it, felt it, not just in the sound but in the way the light outside began to flicker with something that was no longer precise, no longer perfectly aligned. The once singular axis of focus now splitting into faint variations, each one slightly different, as if the system itself was hesitating, trying to resolve something that refused to resolve. Ethan kept his movements minimal, subtle, never repeating, never settling into anything that could be predicted, the ship drifting in irregular paths, small adjustments that felt almost insignificant but carried weight in how the distortion responded, each motion creating a ripple that did not collapse cleanly back into order. "They are recalculating," he murmured, his voice steady, almost calm now, as if the pressure that had once threatened to overwhelm him had instead sharpened his focus. Behind him she remained close, no longer distant, no longer separate, her presence steady at his side, the faint glow beneath her skin now softer, less reactive, as if something within her had also shifted in response to what he was doing. "They have never needed to before," she replied, and there was something in her tone now that carried both realization and something deeper, something that bordered on relief. The lights surged again, but not with the same precision as before, the patterns overlapping, intersecting, failing to fully align, the pressure in the cabin fluctuating in uneven waves, not stronger, but less certain. Ethan exhaled slowly, watching it all unfold. "Then maybe this is new for both of us," he said quietly. The ship drifted again, this time slightly upward, then sharply to the left, then settling into a slow rotation that had no clear purpose except to avoid forming one. The distortion reacted, but slower now. Its response is no longer immediate, no longer exact. "It is losing cohesion," she said, and there was something unmistakable in her voice now, something that had not been there before, not just observation, but belief. Ethan nodded slightly, eyes never leaving the shifting light. "It is trying to simplify something that will not stay simple," he replied, and as he spoke, he adjusted again, introducing another variation, another inconsistency, the ship responding with a slight delay, as if even its systems were struggling to keep up with the environment, but it held. It stayed within that fragile space between control and surrender, and in that space, something remarkable began to happen. The central formation above them flickered, not collapsing, not vanishing, but fragmenting in subtle ways, the unified structure breaking into smaller alignments that no longer agreed with each other, each one attempting to define, to understand, but none fully succeeding. "They cannot resolve you," she said, her voice quieter now, almost in awe. Ethan allowed himself a small breath, something close to relief, but not quite. "No," he said, "they cannot resolve what does not fit." The light pulsed again, weaker this time, the pressure easing just enough to feel like the space was opening again, not fully, not safely, but enough to suggest change, real change, not just delay. And for the first time since the sky began to fold, the sense of being fully seen, fully known, began to fade, replaced by something else, something uncertain, something searching without direction. "They are withdrawing," she said softly, and there it was. Not escape, not victory in any traditional sense, but a shift, a retreat born not from defeat, but from inability to define. Ethan leaned back slightly, his grip on the controls easing just a fraction, not letting go, but no longer braced against something overwhelming. "Not completely," he replied, watching as the distortion above continued to shift, still present, still vast, but no longer focused solely on them. But enough, and in that moment, as the light loosened its hold and the pressure receded into something distant, something watchful rather than immediate, Ethan realized that survival had not come from strength or speed or even understanding, but from something far simpler, something far more human, the refusal to become what something else expected him to be. And beside him, for the first time since she had been freed, she did not look like something being hunted, but something that had chosen to stay. "The universe does not remember who was strongest," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely above the steady hum of the ship as the light outside continued to loosen, the once overwhelming distortion now drifting apart into soft, uneven waves that no longer pressed inward with the same intent, the sky beyond the cockpit glass slowly returning to something recognizable, though still marked by faint ripples that hinted at what had just passed. His hands rested lightly on the controls, no longer forcing movement, no longer resisting anything, just guiding the ship forward at a slow, steady pace. Through the thinning field, beside him she remained still, her presence no longer a source of tension but something quieter, grounded. The glow beneath her blue skin dimmed now to a soft, steady pulse that no longer reacted to the space around them. "It remembers what it cannot understand," she replied, her voice softer than it had ever been, not distant, not guarded, but present in a way that felt almost human. Ethan glanced at her briefly, just a fraction of a second, enough to see the shift in her expression, the absence of that constant readiness, that expectation of pursuit. "Then it is going to have to remember this for a while," he said, turning his attention back to the horizon where the broken remains of the world stretched out beneath them. The ruins no longer felt like a trap, just a place, quiet and empty in a way that did not carry weight anymore. The ship moved beyond the last of the distortion, the air around it settling into something stable, something ordinary. The instruments flickered once, then began to return, partial readings stabilizing across the console. "Not perfect, but enough. They will come back," she said after a moment, not as a warning, but as truth. Ethan nodded slightly, adjusting their course toward open terrain, away from the ruins. "Yeah," he replied. "Most things do." There was no fear in it, no urgency, just acceptance of something that did not need to be solved right now. Silence settled between them, but it was not the same silence as before, not heavy, not uncertain, just space, shared and understood. She looked at him then, really looked, not as something unknown, not as something to measure or evaluate, but as something chosen. "You could have left," she said quietly. Ethan let out a small breath that might have been a laugh if it had carried any sound. "Yeah," he answered. "I know." He did not elaborate, did not need to. The answer was already there, in the path they had taken, in the space they had crossed, in the fact that he was still here and she was no longer alone. The ship continued forward, steady and unhurried, the stars beginning to show faintly above as the last of the distortion faded into nothing more than memory. "What happens now?" she asked, not demanding, not uncertain, just asking. Ethan considered it for a moment, eyes on the horizon, on the quiet stretch of space ahead. Then he shrugged slightly, the motion small but real. "Now," he said, "we figure out where you want to go." There was a pause, and then something changed again, not in the sky, not in the ship, but in her, a subtle shift that carried weight. She did not look away this time, did not retreat into distance. "I did not ask where I want to go," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her again, just briefly, then back to the stars, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "No," he replied, "but I am asking." The silence that followed was different, deeper, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something that did not need definition. And as the ship moved forward into the quiet expanse, leaving behind the place where certainty had failed, there was no dramatic ending, no final resolution, just two figures in a small vessel crossing a vast and indifferent universe. And the simple, stubborn truth that had carried them through it, that he had not been the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced. He had simply refused to walk away, and somehow, that had been enough.